Welcome to Northwoods Kindred. I'm your Gothi Bodvarr, and today we're going to learn about Asatru funerals, coming up on this episode of Learn as You Gothi. Now I'm going to have a download available after this, just a one-page thing that you can download off the website if you're in needs to perform a funeral for someone. Just kind of like, it should refresh your memory on this, but I do suggest that you take notes and you put them in your Gothi binder, because it may be very valuable down the road if you get tasked to perform a funeral for an Asatru, whether you knew him or not. So whether the deceased is Asatru or Norse Pagan or Wicca or anything else, this is probably going to be a suitable funeral rite that you can adapt to meet the needs of not only the person if you knew them, but the requests of the family members. Ultimately, your goal isn't to force your will on them and say, this is how we do it in Norse paganry. But the idea of the Gothi performing this funeral rite is to really to satisfy the family's need. So the family's going to have different criteria and things that they want to accomplish, and it's very important that the Godard listen to what they have and then try to find a way to incorporate it into the base ritual so that you can give the family what they need, because funerals are not for the dead, they're for the living. So admittedly, we know very little about how the Vikings performed a funeral. Not much of it was written down, but we have a lot of archaeological data showing us the practice of burying a body or how they disposed of their dead. So all we can do is take the little bits and pieces that we have from the lore, from the sagas, from the Eddas, and combine it and try and build some sort of a semblance of a practice. And the things that we're missing, we can, in a lot of cases, we can borrow those from other religions, because there's a good chance they borrowed them from us to begin with. But remember, your prime goal is always to execute the wishes of the family. That's the prime goal of the Godard. So all of this may be for nothing, or if the family doesn't know, they might be like, that person was a pagan, we don't know what to do, can you please hold the ceremony? Because that's how it usually turns out, in which case you have to kind of temper this with their needs and wishes, along with whatever data we can gather from our own sources, sagas, and Eddas. And that's what I'm here to help you with. Now, of course, when we say Viking funeral, we think burning ships and funeral pyres and slaying horses and slaves and throwing them up on top of the funeral pyre with the master. That stuff's all fantastic. It looks great in the movies, but that's not practical. And the fact is, most of those things are illegal in most places anyway, around the world right now. So we can't exactly do what we see in the movies. And the truth is, that's all fictional anyway, or most of it is, because we don't really know much about the actual funerary practices. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the actual treatment of the remains. So the family's wishes are paramount here. Whether they want to bury the body or they want to have a cremation, either one of those would be accurate, historically. So the family can handle the remains however they want to. The funerary practice is for the living to say goodbye, not necessarily about how to deal with the actual body. So one thing that we can pull out of the sources is we can understand that our ancestors believed that there was a journey ahead of the deceased. It wasn't an instant thing. They didn't just die and they were in their new place. They had to travel there. So we provide them with provisions and resources to help them make that journey a little bit more comfortable. The idea being that they're hanging around for a few days, they're going to sit around and they're going to watch us say goodbye, bid them good journey, and we're going to give them things to help them on that journey to whichever afterlife they're destined for. It is up to the officiating Godard to make sure that each funeral is unique and special to the family. And again, I want to re-emphasize that we're supporting the family here. And many of them aren't Norse pagan, but they may have other funerary traditions that they want to incorporate. So it's up to the Godard to stay in close communication with the family, so that if there are any traditions like that, if they have any special family traditions, that those can be incorporated into the ceremony so that it is special and meaningful. We can't tell the family that, no, that's not how we do it in Norse paganry. We are going to do exactly what they want, and then we're going to do it in a pagan fashion. It's also not our custom to generally perform any of these ceremonies off of a script or some kind of a booklet. But in the case of a funeral, I would suggest to always have everything scripted and in front of you. Whether or not you use it is entirely up to the Godard, but it's nice to have that as a reference to turn back to and get caught up, because it's a very emotional time, and whether you knew the deceased or not, as the Gothi, it's still going to be emotional. There's still going to be a lot of people. There's going to be crying. There's going to be distractions like babies and stuff. There's going to be a lot of things that go on that can take you away from your actual living in your thoughts at the moment. And it's nice to have some reference to go back to, whether it's an outline of the script or an outline of the proceedings or an actual full-on script. That's totally up to you and your comfort level. But I would suggest having something close at hand in order to get you back on track when those distractions happen or when those emotions are overwhelming. Now, ultimately, the decision to script or not lies with you, the officiating Godar. But I just want to say, make the decision wisely whether or not to have that script, because it's very distracting for even the most seasoned and salty of Godar. Now, a bulleted outline is a handy thing to have, and I'm going to offer that, obviously, for a small donation for a download on my website if you have needs of it. But I'm going to go through it here too, so also take notes. The first thing that I'll talk about is setting up the space. And then we'll go into opening the ceremony and how that's done, the ritual actions or the actual bloat that takes place during the ceremony, honoring the fallen, which is eulogies, because there has to be space for you to shut up and let the family talk. Closing the ceremony, and then the personalized ritual actions, because there's a lot of things that we can add at the end that just kind of make it a little bit more festive, like I imagine it would have been 1,000+ years ago. Now, it's not necessary that the funeral be held outdoors, although that's probably preferred for anybody that would call themselves a pagan, but understanding that location and weather and even other traditions might have some bearing on whether or not it can be held outdoors. That's not a deal breaker. Although you should set up some form of an altar, whether you're doing this outdoors or indoors. There should be an altar set up in the vicinity of the pulpit, and the officiating Godar should be speaking from a pulpit, which is a convenient place to hide your book if you need to go off of a script. For the altar, it's not necessary that it be some consecrated. It can be a card table with a nice altar cloth put on it to make it a little bit more ceremonial. But the structure of the altar doesn't matter, but there should be enough space on there to not only have the traditional ritual items, but a few extra items that people may want to place on it that we'll talk about in a minute. Now, if I was to perform the funeral, what I would do is use a specific altar cloth, such as one with a Thor's hammer or one with some representation of the faith that you're performing it for. A world tree tablecloth would be a really nice one. I'll link to some kind of cool ones that you can find on the web, including the one that I use, and we'll put those in our Amazon store down below. So if you have needs of one, then you can go look at a different variety of them on Amazon. You should have a ritual hammer of Thor, similar to what we would use in an Asatru ritual. You can follow any of our ritual links to see the hammer that we use, or if it's for any other kind of an eclectic pagan, a Wicca or Druid or something, then I guess a wand or some sort of a magical focus device should be there, used to bless articles and bless items that are left on the altar. I think every pagan tradition has some form of the hammer or the wand or the Godard staff or something like that. One of those should be available on the altar as well. A bowl or bowli, a place to pour libations, and I know that different traditions call it a different thing, but there should always be that receiving bowl for the sacrifice. Generally, we would use some sort of a liquid offering. Now, if the deceased was an alcoholic and didn't drink, then maybe we could do milk with honey or a juice or a cider. But in most cases, I think a mead or a beer or a wine is a suitable offering for a funerary service. You just have to know the attendants and also know that if people are going to speak and they're a recovering alcoholic, you don't want to hand them a horn with alcohol in it. So if that's possible in the presence of the attending guests, then it would probably be best to just go with milk and honey or juice or something of the non-alcoholic nature. Generally, we'll have a drinking horn or a chalice or some sort of a communal drinking vessel present as well, and that's what we'll pour it into, and we'll use that to for people to make their toasts to the fallen. Generally have a burning candle or torch or incense, or a fire pit would be ideal. But even if it's just an indoor funerary service, you can still put a candle or some incense burning on the table or the altar near the other ritual tools, so that we always have that element of fire, because fire really is the opening line of communication between us and the gods. It opens the it's the dial tone when you pick up the phone. It really does open that line of communication. So there should be some fire element involved, and I'm pretty sure that most, if not all, pagan practices would agree with that. It is always the custom of any officiating Godar to have in their possession an oath ring at any public gathering or service. It's kind of a trickle-down tradition held over from the days of the old Godar in Iceland before the full conversion to Christianity, and the oath ring to swear an oath on was something that was required of the Godar to have at any kind of a public function in case people needed to swear an oath or get married or do anything. This is no different. The Godar should have in their possession the oath ring, and in this case I would leave it on the altar near all the other goods. In most cases it's nice to have a picture of the deceased displayed in a nice frame on the altar with all the other altar items, so that when people go up and they do their toast or whatever, they can talk to their fallen, because it feels better. It feels like it comes more from the heart if you have a picture of the fallen there that you can talk to, and rather than just talking to a bunch of articles on a table or to a crowd of people. None of them are the one who's supposed to be receiving your message. Also on the table could be any of the items that the deceased held dear. It could be jewelry or ritual tools or something from their own practice, or possibly something they made, but some of those things that they held dear, like maybe that one hammer or that one ring that you always saw them having on, and may or may not be buried with them, but it should be out there just kind of like a symbolic and energetic representation of this person that everybody knew and loved. And then it's also important on this altar to leave space for gifts and mementos from the loved ones to the fallen. They can be buried with them, or they can worry about how to dispose of those items later, but some people will, in a lot of cases, give gifts to the fallen. They'll take them there to help them on their travels. And of course those gifts can consist of food and perishable items, or jewelry, or weapons, or anything that people feel would help them in their travels to wherever they're headed in the afterlife. And lastly, one thing that you can include is a lot of smaller candles for the attendees or the eulogizers to light. So they can light a candle and place it on the altar as they give their personal eulogy to the fallen, and have enough spares that everybody can come up and light a candle and say what they have to say. So if there's 50 people in attendance, you can bet that 50 people aren't going to talk, but you want to have enough candles that if everybody does, there's a candle there for them to light. Or you could reserve the lighting of the candles only for the closest of the fallen, like the parents or the siblings or the immediate family members, and then all the friends can come up, can do something else. But this is entirely just a conversation between you and the family. But it is a nice added touch to light the candle and set it on the altar and then eulogize the fallen. It looks really, really good, and it makes people feel like they have some sort of a stake in the ceremony itself, other than just being a talking head. So all of that is of course the way that I would set it up. You could set up a separate table with just candles and the picture and some other goods separate from the ritual stuff. That's entirely up to you, the resources and the location where the funeral is going to be taking place. So I don't want to try and make anything seem dogmatic. Of course, I came up with this ritual with research and practice, but I don't want to make it seem like this is the only way you can do it. I'm only trying to inspire, give some examples, maybe historic, maybe not, that people can use to move forward. So those things are all the parts that I would include in a funerary rite, but they may not always look the same depending on the needs and the wishes of the surviving family. And lastly, how to deal with the grave goods, the personal tokens and mementos that people leave to the fallen, is something for the family to figure out. It's also something that can be passed back out later on at the Arvel, the inheritance feast, but that's a whole different topic for a whole different video. So the first thing that's going to happen is once you've got the area set up, as your attendees are going to come in, it's always nice to have some ushers that know where to put everybody, but again, some of that is just logistics that the family can figure out on their own. Unless you're in charge of the entire thing, then it's not something you want to overlook. You want to actually get some names for ushers, teach them what to do, and show them where to seat the family. The seating arrangement can be talked over with the family. It can be something up to their wishes, or you can arbitrarily assign seats, or it can just be willy-nilly. Everybody just sits where they show up. None of that really matters. as far as we're concerned from a Norse pagan perspective. It just is what it is. People come in and they sit down. When you begin the funerary service, I like to start with a little bit of instruction. Welcome the family. We're sorry for your loss. Hopefully we can make this whole thing a little bit more whole. You should, in some cases, explain the steps that you're going to go through in the funerary process, taking for granted that most of the people here are not Norse pagan, but you want to be respectful of them, and you don't want it to seem like off-putting and confusing or weird. So the best way to do that is to throw an outline at them and be like, hey, I am Gothi Bodvarr, and I'm here to perform the funerary rite for your fallen in a way that's traditional to the modern Norse pagans, in keeping with our ancient traditions, so that we can help usher your loved one on his way to the afterlife, so that we can meet again one day, and etc. And you can do the whole thing, but it's important to introduce yourself with your title so they know exactly who they're talking to or who they're listening to. And so the next part we'll talk about is the actual ritual action. So once we've introduced it, we began it. As the Gothi, I would light the candle, or initiate whatever the flame is, whether it be the need fire or a candle or incense or whatever. If it's not already burning, then this is the point where I would ignite it or light it prior to beginning the ceremony. And now in my case, I would open the four corners, northeast, south, and west. I understand that some Wicca do northeast, south, and west, above and below. Some people don't do it at all. It's entirely up to you. However you would open a ritual officially, then that's how I would do it. But in this case, since it would essentially be me or the officiating Godar up on the pulpit, instead of walking around everybody in a big circle and doing northeast, southwest on the northeast and southwest perimeter of the Vey or the area, I would do it from a standing position. I would just face about, face to each direction as I opened it up to that direction, in order to expedite the process and to not make it too weird for people, because remember, a lot of these people have never been to a pagan ritual. So if you do open four corners however you normally do it, I would suggest not walking all the way around the hall or all the way around the gravesite or whatever, but just to stand still and just face in the various different directions would be my recommendation. Certainly that's how I would do it. I would open it up like that, and I would call to the holy forces and guiding spirits, and say that we're here to send off with light and love our dearly departed or our fallen. And then I would generally read some passage from the Havamal, cattle die, kinsmen die, and those are Havamal stanzas 76 and 77. They go very well with the funeral, because it's like, death touches us all. It was just the deceased's turn, and we'll miss them, but we'll meet them again in the afterlife. So, something of that, some sort of reassuring stuff like that. And of course, reading those two passages from the Havamal is pretty traditional, modern tradition of the Norse pagans. And then after reading of the Havamal, I would raise a horn to the gods or the spirits and thank them for guiding us, keeping this place protected and free of distraction while we, do this send-off to our fallen. Use your own words, or like I said, script it. And then I would invite various deities in. It's very helpful if you know the deceased and you kind of know where they fall on the spectrum of what gods they honor primarily. Barring that, we would still probably honor some basics in the first place. For example, we would honor Odin and ask Odin to receive and guide and inspire our departed to find their way to their hall where they should be going. You could, and this is one of the few circumstances where I would actually give an offering to the goddess Hela, or Hel, and I would give her an offering to receive our dead, to deck her halls and be ready to receive him and to guide him through down the road to hell, into her domain, to safely receive him. So it never hurts to bribe the warden, right? So this is one of the situations where I would certainly offer to Hel. I would offer to Heimdall to sound his Gallarhorn and let the other gods know that another of our fallen, another beloved kinsman, member of the folk of the gods, has passed on and will be requiring some attention on the other side. However you want to word that. There's a whole host of gods and goddesses, so use whichever ones feel right for the deceased, for the circumstance, and put it in your own words. So after we invite the gods, this would be a good spot to provide like a brief overview of the life of the fallen. We've known him this long. He had some hard times. He served in the military. He beat cancer. He did all these different things, and then, then he succumbed to a car accident or whatever. Like, spell it out. Let people know what happened. Let people know the value that this person brought to you and to the people, as well as the loss that will be felt, and talk about like the impact that the deceased has made on the lives of the people who are in the room. Even if it's not your story, gather those stories a little bit. Like he helped, people get sober, and he sponsored, 7 people in his, in his life, and then he did this and that. And so talk about the things that he did that made a difference to other people without stealing their story. So it is nice to talk to the other people that are there and be like, oh yeah, I'm missing, like he was my first sponsor in AA or whatever. And then you can use that without taking away from the people if they want to talk about that. You can say, he sponsored people in AA and he got clean and he came, you can talk about those kind of things. And I'm speaking, of course, I have a particular individual in mind, and I'm sure that you probably do too, but the idea is that get to know the fallen as good as possible and really, really sell to the people his value that he had on his time here in Midgard. And then after you do that little eulogy, even if you didn't know him, you can still do some form of eulogy because you're setting the example. And then you invite anybody that would like to say a few words to come up and speak on the behalf of the deceased. And then you can also explain to them that as they say words of encouragement and support for the deceased, this helps them on their way. This makes the gods and the other attendees in the afterlife, it tells them how important this person was to you, and it gives them fair notice. You better take care of him when he's there, or we're gonna be coming for you. So you can sell it like that, and then let the people come up and say in their own words, light a candle and speak. And you hand them the horn and they can speak on that, and they can pour a little in the bowlie, or they can take a drink, whatever they want to do, or they can pour it on the ground. It's all up to whatever instruction you give them. In that case, I'd be like, if anybody would like to speak, please come up, take the horn, say your toast or say your words, pour a little in the bowlie, or take a drink, or pour it on the ground at your leisure. But you gotta know that if you're gonna do that, you have to have extra libation, because some fool will pour it all out, the whole horn. It will happen at least once. And then you can, take it back, refill it, and remind everybody they're just pouring a drink, and then let it go. But it will happen. Somebody will pour it all out, and it's nothing against them. They're a grieving person. They maybe don't understand the instructions fully, but it will happen. Have extra mead, wine, beer, or whatever you're using available, because you don't want to put them on the spot. Now, after everybody goes through the eulogy and we had no problems here, I'd set the horn back down on the altar, and then I would probably tell everybody, let's just have a moment of silence. Let's just quietly contemplate the journey that's ahead of our dearly departed, for a pause of 9 heartbeats, or a pause of 9 breaths, and just count slowly. Like make it a long 9, like make them think on it. Just pure quiet while everybody just reflects on the journey ahead for their fallen. So, and then after that, you can close the ceremony, just like you would close almost any other religious ceremony. You would bid the gods, the goddesses, the attended folk a good journey home. And this is a really good time to give on any other follow-on instructions from the family. Even if you covered them at the beginning, oh, hey, there's a GoFundMe to help pay for the funeral costs and all that kind of stuff, blah, 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 blah. Now you're at the end. The family would also like me to mention that there is a GoFundMe. You can make donations in his name to this and this email or whatever. There's also a feast set aside for you at the Cracker Barrel at 1 o'clock this afternoon. It's all paid for. Everybody just come to the Cracker Barrel and meet up or whatever. We have our own separate parking off to the side. Whatever it is, like whatever notes the family has for you, now's the time to get it out, because everybody's in attendance. If you wait, if you release everybody and then you try to pass the word, then 50% of the room won't hear it. So you have to say it while you still have them as a captive audience, and that's important when you're doing the planning, to go to the family and be like, I'm going to make announcements at the end of this. So if you have anything you need to get out, anything else that you want to tell everybody, give me a list, and we can annotate this list all the way up until the minute we start the funeral. So definitely that's a way that you can provide a service to the family that some people would generally forget about. So after the closing, I would take the bowlie with the offering and I would take it outside. And you can possibly even ask people if they want to go outside. You're going to pour this offering on the ground, and pour this libation to the gods and to the fallen. And then you can say a few, if anybody goes out with you, then you can say a few words there, like, we offer you this libation. Let it be a symbol of our dedication and love for you, and and reflect the light that you brought into our lives. Whatever you want to say, use your words, or script it however it works for you, and then pour it out on the ground. And then that part of it is done. And you'll find that a lot of people will get a little sniffly around that part, and that's okay, because they should feel the emotion that you created in this whole ceremony. So some personalized ritual actions that you can incorporate into it is talk with the family beforehand and say that people want to give gifts to the fallen, small things that can either be buried with them, or put in with their ashes, or potentially even just return to the family. If people want to bring those gifts and mementos to the funeral, they need to know this ahead of time. So that's one of the personalized actions that you can take. You just have to get that word out to the family with enough time that they can let the attendees know. Another thing that people may like to do as far as personalized ritual actions go is some people like to sing. So if somebody is going to sing, make room, incorporate it somewhere in the ritual, that there's room for them to come up and sing the song they want to sing, or play the music they want to play, or show a audio video slideshow with pictures and video of the fallen, if that's available, which it usually is nowadays. You have to decide where in your ritual outline those are the right moments to incorporate these things. It lengthens the ceremony, it creates more emotion in the room, and it makes the whole thing more valuable and memorable to not only the family, but the people who attended. And it also makes you look more professional when everything is organized and structured in a way that they can understand and appreciate. Not just some random willy-nilly, we're going to go out and do a ritual and dump some meat on the ground and then go away, and people don't even understand what they just saw. I would let the family know that there will be a space set aside for poetry and music and those kind of things if people want to contribute in that way. I would feel, in most cases, I would probably write a poem for my fallen friends and family members, something I could say from the heart, but I would definitely rehearse it. And in some cases, when we send a poem like that, I like to send it on fire, so I'll read it and burn it. If that's maybe a tradition that you wanted to incorporate, then it's also nice to have a way for that to happen safely, be it lighting it on a candle and placing it in a bowl or a pot that you have there just for burning stuff, or if you have an open sort of a pyre or a need fire that they can put it into and burn their own words after they speak them. I've found that that's a powerful way to say goodbye or to send a message, is to read a poem or some written words and then burn it, and then the words can go up on the ashes to the deceased and to the gods. And then the last thing that you can do, you can incorporate into the funerary service, is later on that evening or at the after party, you can have the Arvel, which is the inheritance feast, or you can just have a summel where everybody can say goodbye in their own words in a whole nother way. And we've got videos on the summel, and we'll have a video on the Arvel eventually. It's a whole separate sort of a ritual where the goods that are left behind are divvied up among the kinsmen and the family and the friends. Sort of like in the movies, it would be the traditional reading of the will, where you have all these ungrateful family members sitting around waiting to see how much money they got. The Arvel would be sort of like the precondition that made that a tradition. And it was people die, they leave stuff behind. It has to go somewhere. It should go to family members, kinsmen, and whatnot. And we've done funerals for our fallen kinsmen in the past, and we've received most of their pagan articles, books, weapons, garb, things that were very exclusive or specific to Asatru practice that the family had no use for, but they knew that it was valuable to the deceased. So rather than try to find a use for it or sell it, they said, hey, you guys were the closest in this part of their life, here's all of their stuff. So then we would have to have an Arvel and an inheritance feast where we figure out who gets what of the stuff. You know what I mean? So that's a whole different sort of a ritual, and maybe we'll do another video on that down the road. But I think you're probably smart enough to put something like that together if it falls in your lap before then. So what I've created, which will be on my website, available for download for a small donation, is just this simple outline right here that says Northwoods Kindred Asatru Funeral Service, copyright 2023, and it just says, this is a brief outline of the Asatru funerary service. It is provided so the servicing Godar, you, can write a personalized script for the proceedings. It may also be useful to provide this outline to the family for use on a program or other planning considerations. So that's something I didn't talk about, but if you gave this to the family, if the family's doing a funerary program that they're handing out to people that come in, it really lightens your workload, because now people understand the proceedings, the layout, the ritual, and how everything's going to happen. So I would suggest that you either take good notes on the stuff that we've already talked about, or just go download this for, for a small donation, and then have this in your Gothi book and ready to give to the family or to build your outline off of if you ever get tasked with providing an Asatru or Norse Pagan or an animist funeral for someone in the future. So that about covers it for the Asatru or Pagan funeral, which is, I think, an important skill for anybody who calls themselves a Gothi. Even if you're just a household Gothi or a hus Gothi for just your family, there's still a possibility that some distant friend is going to die and want a Viking funeral, and somebody's going to task you with it because they know that you are Viking. I don't like using those words, but I'm trying to use the terminology of the masses here. And that's how it's going to come across. Hey, can you provide a Viking funeral for this dude who died that we knew? And that's all they're going to know. So instead of correcting them, let's just use the terminology they're going to use. It's pretty obvious that when we go through our lives, we have certain rituals of our life, from births and namings and funerals and weddings. Those are things that are generally officiated by some sort of a clergy. And if you are that clergy, then it's probably a good idea to have at least some idea on how to perform these things and have some sort of an outline you can build off of, so you can make it very personal and meet the needs of the family. I can't overemphasize that your goal is to meet the needs of the family, even if it doesn't look like the things that we've talked about, and even if it's not consistent with the traditions of the Norse Pagan and the Norse animist funerary services. Now, here's just one more point that a lot of people don't consider, and it might catch you off guard, is that most of the people in the room are likely to be Christian, which means even if they come up and they go through these proceedings and they raise a horn to speak, there's a really good chance that they'll raise a horn to the one true God, or to Jesus and Mary, or all these other things that you would technically not generally see the horn go up to. Don't take offense when they say the one true God. They're not saying that your God isn't real, although they might be saying that, but that's not what they need to get out. They just don't know how to verbalize it any other way. I've seen it so many times where a Christian comes in and sits in a stumble with us, even though the rules of stumble are you can't insult anybody's god or goddess who's present, and then the horn goes up to the one true God. It's not meant as an insult. They just don't know how to articulate what they're saying because they're raising a horn to a one God instead of a pantheon of gods. So don't take that kind of stuff personally, especially at a funeral. Water off a duck's back. Your job isn't to educate everybody on paganism. Your job is simply to meet the needs of the family. So I hope you found some value in that. If you have any other topics that you would like to know about, or maybe some Gothi hiccups that you've experienced on your journey to be clergy for your tribe, put them down in the comments. Let me know. And I'll do my best to put together a video to help you work your way through some of those problems. The Northwoods Kindred is a relatively new kindred at 3 years old, but I've been on this path a long, long time, and I've solved a lot of these problems already. And if it's a new problem for me, then we can work together and we can solve it together. But I'll do my best to provide training here on Learn As You Go that will help you get through the hiccups that you're having on your journey from practitioner to Godar. I want to make it very known. They will f this up. They will f this up. But you can't hold them. You can't be like, hey, dumbass, you poured the whole horn out, because that does not make for a good funeral.